Hello, my name is S.K. Williams, and this is my first video for this channel that I have released after the Paschal season, which, for those who don't know, I commemorated following the Eastern Orthodox pattern this year rather than the Western pattern due to a conflicting schedule preventing me from starting Lent at the proper time for the West. So I went eastward this year, and that time has finally passed this previous Sunday, which, while in the West, Easter was celebrated on the 5th of April 2026, it was celebrated in the East on the 12th of April 2026. Though I did have to attend a divine liturgy. I've done that every year for the last 3 years, though regrettably I had to attend a different divine liturgy this year than I did in the previous two, because the church that I normally attend is moving to a new building and it's closed down for a couple of weeks. The congregation, I heard, was having its Paschal celebration at a monastery, but I didn't know where that was, and from the description and the general area where I was told it was, it would have taken us about an hour and a half to get there. We already have to drive about an hour to get to the Divine Liturgy. We only go about once a year anyway. And I don't know what the congregation did for the 2 weeks the church was closed besides that. Perhaps they met at the monastery each time, or perhaps somewhere else, I don't know. But I do know that it is good that their congregation is growing and that they can now afford their own building instead of staying in a tiny house, a townhouse, with not much yard. So it's a good thing, but it did mean that I couldn't attend this year their services, because they didn't hold any. They instead availed themselves to the services at the monastery. So I attended a different one. Slightly different rites, different church. Instead of the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, it was an Orthodox church in America, but regardless, it was a very pleasant service. Now, I should note that my final Lenten reflection for my new channel was not released on time, and it will be released this week. And I don't truly consider the Paschal season over because I haven't had a family dinner to commemorate it on either Easter or on Pascha. And we've arranged to do so on Friday. Now, for me, the fast is over. I can eat cheese again. I'm a vegetarian, so giving up meat is pretty meaningless. But I won't consider the Paschal season over until the Friday, so it's not that big of a deal. Though it is regrettable that I didn't load it on time, I simply left it at my house when I went back into town and gained internet access. But with all that said, I shall load it late, but it is what it is. But the Paschal season does call to mind renewal. And we seem to be in a transition period, away from a progressive era for the last 20 or 25 years, marked by things like the new atheism, which, quite contrary to what it claimed, was neither just a group of people who had nothing in common but their lack of belief in a god. They had organization behind it, obviously. And in fact, there are atheist organizations that exist that promoted it. And the new atheists themselves were all represented by the same literary agent, John Brockman, who, of course, founded the Edge Foundation, which got its financing from a man whose name I can't really mention. So I use the alternate name of Jack Ebstone, and trust the listener to know who it is that I'm speaking of. The two of you makes it rather difficult to communicate, so I've fallen into certain habits of speech here, like the odd pauses that I use. Nevertheless, the progressive era burned itself out, which was predictable. It happened before. For some reason, progressives always think when they bring up the progressive ideas and start capturing the public imagination and institutions that this is some unique moment in history for the first time ever. And it's really not. This happened in the mid-19th century, the late 19th century, the 1920s. That's where we got the flappers from, and the 1960s. This happens periodically. And the progressive movement always ends up burning itself out and regressing. But we never go truly back. It's not quite the pendulum swing that we say. There is a resurgence of what we call conservatism or right-wing thought. And it is based on certain principles that don't seem to change, or at least not much over time. But whenever a new rightward shift goes to the culture, those principles are reinterpreted and a new framework is put around them, often incorporating some of the narrative points of the progressives, meaning it doesn't fully go away, or the responses to the progressives, which still accepts the basic premise. We're not going to see, for instance, a resurgence of 1950 America reborn. The modern conservative movement is not identical to that. And you see that in the way they contextualize America and its history, and in the way that they hold to certain other principles. They're similar, but not identical. For instance, modern conservatives don't really want to remove women's rights to vote or own property, like progressives keep saying. They don't want to go back to racial segregation. They don't really want to go back to exactly as it was in the 1950s. They're more libertarian, really. And that's perhaps going to change. We're still in a state of flux. Perhaps the libertarianism is just the breaking of the chains that progressives put on us, chains that they called freedom, but chains all the same. But perhaps it'll crystallize into something else. We're still regenerating, if you will. We haven't taken on a solid form yet when it comes to conservatism. But we do know that the renewal pattern is very similar. And it's very interesting how that happens, how things we think are dead come back and live again, just as Christ, who we thought was dead, came back and lived again. And it should remind us that while history doesn't repeat itself, there are cycles. And just as there are winters and summers, and when the spring comes and the plants begin to bloom, they never bloom exactly the same way twice. But there's always a blooming season. We need to realize that human nature is what it is, and it will repeat itself, and it will assert itself, and you can predict general future trends by the past. I don't have much else to say, so I shall take my leave of you now. Thank you, God bless, and goodbye.